Thank you for joining us for AHA, which stands for A Human Among Humans.
All right.
And we have an amazing human being with us. Her name is Maya Apfelbaum. And tell us why you're here, Maya.
Well, there could be a million reasons, but the main reason is that Michael and I have known each other for over 30 years. And Michael also knew my father, Jack Apfelbaum, well. My father passed a year ago. So Michael and I have decided to do something very special about that together, which is to meet once a year and share memories of my dad, and then from there, whatever conversation evolves, right? Isn't that why we're together today?
I'm delighted. I didn't know it was every year. My name is Michael Koran.
That's what you told me last year.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Memory is getting challenging, so I'm glad I said it.
Well, we can always
No, I
change
love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. So I'm just going to check you. You just look at your loving audience.
Hello, whoever's out there. And thank you for watching this rather than the Super Bowl tonight. I feel like I'm way off to the side of the screen. Is there any
You can
way-
move. You can move.
Oh, okay. I thought I had to
Move toward me.
There
yes.
we are. That's
you are.
better.
Oh, good.
Hi, everybody. That's
Hello
better.
again. Welcome to AHA. I haven't. No. Okay. So what are your feelings and thoughts about Jack now? Tonight, actually.
Well, I feel like last year when my father passed away on February 1st, with my sisters, Amanda and Claudia, standing around him, and me and my mother upstairs in their bedroom. My father was home in a bed, but on the first floor. I felt like the emotions were very deep and very powerful, and that I was opened in some way that I hadn't been before. But
In what way?
but this
Okay.
year, you asked, I had to go back to last year for comparison. This year I feel more back to my normal life, yet there is an added dimension of frequently making a prayer for my father, or sort of like trying to connect to whatever form he's in now. So I think there's a lot more to say about that, but it feels much less emotionally charged. Yeah.
And you were open. You said last year at this time. Would you care to tell us how?
Can you make that question even more specific?
Well, you said I was open when I was with him as he was dying. So I wondered what was that opening that you experienced?
You know, some of it was just the immensity of love.
Wow.
Yeah. And you know the famous expression that turns out to be all too true, you don't know what you've had till it's gone.
Oh my.
Of course, it wasn't quite that, because he hadn't quite left yet. It was in the last few weeks when he was in the hospital in intensive care, and then in a less intensive care unit, but still very, very ill. And then he came home by one of those big ambulance trucks from Boston all the way out to Littleton, Mass, where my mother lives and where our family house is. And the last...
And where he was living with
he
your
was
mother.
living,
Yeah.
right, exactly, thank you. And that last about a week and a half or two, where he was back at our house, our family house in Littleton, Mass, in hospice, there was the sense that it probably was the end. He was in the hospice program. He had pretty bad heart conditions, and trouble with his lungs, water getting in his lungs. And he had agreed to be in hospice, which implies that you're letting go. You're not going to be sent back to the hospital. So there was this sense that it was the precious time with him. And that, in a way, you can think all your life, oh, I really want to honor this person. Oh, this is precious time with them. But it's not quite as real as when you actually know somebody's on their way out. We were very lucky that we actually kind of had a heads up. We didn't just lose him in an accident or overnight to a heart attack. We had a real heads up, and we had this window of time to really be present with my dad. So love was immense.
Wow.
Just love, so much love in that room, and other things, but I don't want to ramble too long.
You can tell us some of the other things if you like, or maybe one of them.
Well, let's come back to it if we want to. I'd like to turn the table because it's a lot of talking from me.
Okay.
And I'd love for you to turn the table, share either something you've experienced around the death of a loved one, or a question you have about passing on to the other side, or
Or
your
memory
memory
of Jack.
of Jack, another memory of
The
Jack.
the one I remember the most. See, I stay home and write during the days usually, but Jack was good at getting me to come out to Littleton.
Yeah.
And I remember a walk, and this probably won't sound like very much, but it really was. And it was twilight, my favorite time of day. And we were walking in the woods near the lake that you live near, Long Lake.
Yeah.
And I think it was the most beautiful sunset I've ever seen. And it was wonderful sharing it with him.
Wow.
And I told him that.
That's so beautiful and fitting.
Yes, he loved the outdoors.
Yeah.
And loved me, which was very touching.
Did you felt conscious of that when he was alive, that he loved you?
Oh, he was the one who, it was...
Oh yeah, you said that last year. We were talking about your memories last year.
Yeah,
he reached out.
he was the one who always, it was usually the other way around, the younger person would, but he would just reach out and say, Mike, haven't seen you for a while, come on out. And I would be a good boy and do it.
So did he fit some role besides friend for you?
He wasn't certainly a father. I would always tease him. I would tease him about death, actually. I say,
Really?
Jack, you're going to be surprised. You will be surprised. Because he didn't think, he thought that was it. He was a very practical, scientific, down-to-earth man. And he had no interest, really no interest in religious, at least, religious as we understand it in the West. No interest in the afterlife or anything like that. It was like when I grew up. It was like mentioning God when I grew up in Brooklyn. We both lived in Brooklyn, Jack and I.
Right, yeah.
At the same time. He was about
Amazing.
18 years older than me.
Yeah, amazing. And
But
he had come over from Germany.
Yes.
Whereas you were born there, right?
I was born in Brooklyn, right?
Yeah, so very different
But
relationship.
we were there at the
Yeah,
same...
it's amazing. And I brought you two together.
Yes, right. And one of the reasons, at least I began the friendship, was I wanted to stay connected to you, and we had lost connection
Yeah.
for various reasons.
Wow.
And so now it's working.
Look at how that happens. That is magical. And of course, life brought you and me together in the course on Judaism
Yes.
that you were teaching at the Cambridge Adult Ed Center.
Yeah.
And I grew up with two wonderful parents, both who left Nazi Germany at different times. They didn't know each other in Germany, but other in a way than being ethnically Jewish and feeling the weight of that history. I didn't grow up with a particularly Jewish upbringing in terms of holidays or going to temple.
You guys had Hanukkah bushes, I remember, on Christmas.
We did have Hanukkah bushes?
On Christmas, yes, they would have. I do believe in your home, on either Hanukkah or Christmas, you'd have a fir tree.
We did. We
Yes.
actually called it a Christmas tree. Not even
Oh, you didn't even call it a
Hanukkah Mas
bush.
Christmas. I know,
I
no.
see.
But we do have a menorah, and we did celebrate often Hanukkah and Passover, and sometimes a little bit around Yom Kippur or other
my.
major holidays. And I definitely felt that my parents identified as Jewish, but also as world citizens and as humanists,
Yes, very much so.
more than strictly as Jewish
Very right.
or German or American. And one thing that I, as I grew up, then I got sort of curious about my Jewish background and what Judaism means on a more spiritual or religious or kind of literary level. So that's part of why I took your class, because I hadn't gotten a lot of that information.
I'm glad you didn't. And when I grew up,
See, if they had taught me a lot, I never would have met you.
yes, yes.
At all.
And when I grew up, even mentioning God was like mentioning a horse and carriage. It was so irrelevant to lives. It was really never mentioned.
You know what's interesting, though? You were saying how my dad was sort of a practical, scientific man, and that's true. He was an engineering teacher. However, he and I shared a lot about remembering our dreams,
Oh, yes.
which is sort of almost more like a mystic realm, even though it also is being studied. Dreams are studied scientifically a lot.
Yes.
And one thing that really struck me once is that he shared that he had had a dream about God.
Wow.
Yeah.
Never told me. I've been teasing him for
maybe,
years.
Maybe he forgot it the
I've
next
been
morning.
teasing him
Next
for
day.
years.
So, and then also, when I Zoomed last year, I taught a workshop on Martin Luther King Day, and this year I also did. And last year I was somewhat worried during the whole workshop, like, oh my gosh, my father has been flown by helicopter. He liked to fly, but he had never been flown by helicopter in an emergency into the hospital last year on Martin Luther King Day. And I was like, oh my gosh, should I teach this workshop or should I just go see him right now? And I kept being encouraged to teach the workshop, but right after it, I jumped in my car and I zoomed down the highway and I got to my father's room in the intensive care unit, and I don't know if it was that night or the next night, but he told me this other dream that he had, and I thought it was worth sharing because it was
Yes.
so beautiful and interesting.
Tell us.
So I'm just getting used to the TV screen. Like, if I look at you out there in the audience,
No, you should be looking at the camera, though.
at the camera, what's
That's
it?
it. On the left.
Oh,
That's where
you
Ananda...
should have told me that.
Yes, that's where Nanda and Eva are.
Oh,
Yeah.
I've been looking up there the whole time.
No, we're learning as we go.
Okay, well, I hope you guys all like that kind of upward look.
Yes, yeah.
So, I like looking at you, but I'm going to look at the camera for this. So, my father told me basically that he had had a dream that he remembered quite well where he was going around the desert and he had some kind of, not like malicing destructive gun, but some kind of gun-like object, not like an AK or an Uzi, and he was going around the desert shooting rocks, not people. And the rocks, as soon as they were shot, they would sort of explode and turn into sort of feathery things that floated off in the air. And later on, my father added that he wasn't doing this alone. He was part of some kind of sort of tribal group going around the desert, shooting these rocks and having them turn into like feathery air. And that's all I remember him telling me of the dream. And we didn't analyze it together. And at that point, it wasn't clear that my dad was going to be coming home at hospice. But I found, he seemed to like the dream and find it a bit mysterious.
Wow.
And I'm wondering if you feel that you got something from it yourself, just hearing it.
Shooting rocks And the rocks would become feathery birds or just feathers?
He said the closest way to describe it was feathery, but they became light and airy.
So what we do in dream, you might have done this, is if it was your dream,
Yes.
what would it mean to you?
Well, I can tell you, but
Okay.
then first think what it might mean to you.
What if it was my dream and I was shooting rocks and they turn into feathers, maybe birds, but feathers?
Not birds, just feathery light essences. Yeah.
Oh my.
We could draw it as a Chagall painting and turn them into
Yes.
birds.
Oh, I see.
Get creative.
Well, for me now it would mean to find the spirit in the rock, and sometimes we need to do destructive things to open that spirit.
Interesting. Because certainly in many religions and certainly in ancient beliefs, rocks do have spirit, do have like power.
Yeah, they made gods that the rocks would enter the gods would enter the rock, the carved rocks.
Yeah, or like the mountain
Yes.
where God speaks.
Yes.
So for me, I took it, I'm going to lower this a little. Oh, hi.
Hi.
I was sitting so much higher than you. We're getting the show together as we go. I felt it was easy for me to interpret it as my father was getting ready to go from solid into spirit, or solid into
Oh my.
air.
Wow.
And that in a sense we're made out of, our bones are in a sense made out of stardust and rock and mineral. And then he was sort of exploding that back into air and spirit and feather. And he wanted to have a green burial. I think I spoke about this a little last year on our TV show. But there aren't enough easily accessible green burial spaces in Massachusetts yet for that to have happened readily.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just like do it in your local cemetery unless they've already set aside green burial spaces. And you can in Mount Auburn Cemetery, which is in Cambridge, but it's quite expensive.
Yes.
and
You
turned
should
out
explain to the audience what.
a green burial.
Yeah.
I keep forgetting. It's
The
green
left-
burial is the way people were buried all together up until maybe 100, 150 years ago, when we started having coffins and cement and trying to sort of fix the body with chemicals. So green burial was just a very natural burial, often in a cloth or a cardboard box, or where the person's body went, instead of being embalmed in chemicals that keep them, their body was close to the earth when you put them in, and soon decomposed to become part of the earth again. And certain religions still have that, as often Jewish cemeteries
Yes.
have green burials, but generally in America, a whole business evolved around, like, cement and heavy wooden coffins and embalming the body, and it's really an expensive, big business, and often adds a lot of pollution to the ground.
Yeah.
So right now, nowadays, I wish I knew more specifics. There are various groups working on advocating to get green burial spaces in Massachusetts, and sometimes like at a Quaker meeting house or Jewish cemetery, or a few towns do have green burial spaces, but in general it's hard to do legally. You could always sneak one in your backyard.
Yes. Yes.
So don't quote me on that. So he had wanted a green burial, but he wasn't that attached to it. And when it became clear that that wasn't such a good option for him this time around, he did decide to go with cremation. And I guess I'm trying to bring this back to the dream about the rocks, because what I was amazed about is when we got his ashes back from the cremation home, it was very profound for me, very powerful to feel how much my dad's bones had weighed. Even without his character and his flesh and his
Yes.
muscles and his veins added on, even boiled down to his skeleton of bones and then burnt into ashes, he weighed a lot. And he wasn't a particularly huge man.
No.
So I felt, I hadn't said this till tonight, but I felt the matter, the stone,
Wow.
the earth, the weight of his physical body
Yes.
in those ashes. And it's an interesting, nice connection to the dream where he was exploding the stones, not in a harsh way, but almost like releasing them back to spirit.
Wow.
And we did release his ashes. That's a big...
To the air?
Well, that's a very big thing that happened this year. Yes, we released them to the water and the air on Cape Cod, which is one of his favorite places and one of my family's favorite places.
Yes.
Around Wellfleet and New Orleans. Not New Orleans, sorry, Orleans and Eastham and Chatham, all along the sort of middle to end of the Cape, all the way down to P-Town. We just loved the beaches and the bay there.
Wow.
And so we had a real special pilgrimage this year with just my mom, who's 90 and doing really well, and my two sisters and me. It was very intimate, very personal. We don't have any other siblings. We didn't have my brother-in-law along, and we didn't have my niece along. We have a small family. We didn't have my cousins. We didn't have our friends along. It was really our very intimate circle, and some very beautiful things happened there, like mystical and powerful.
Mystical in what sense?
Well, again, I enjoy your questions, but it's a lot of talking for me. So
okay.
Can we maybe turn the tables back for a minute? And,
Sure.
Can you actually literally turn this table?
We could.
That would take a lot of time.
We could for the second show, yes.
Let me ask you, was there something about my dad's writing that you remember?
Well, he wrote a column called Notes from the Sweat Lodge, right?
Yes, Thoughts from a Sweat Lodge.
Thoughts from the Sweat Lodge. And it was published in Littleton for years, really. And he collected it. And I think he sent it to me for maybe any suggestions in editing. But it was really very good and very down to earth, like
Very
him.
down to earth, yeah.
Yes.
Very real.
Yep. I mean, if we had time, and had prepared, we could read a column, but we won't.
In the next half of this show, we happen to have an extra long show tonight, right?
Thanks to Michael Mack, yes.
Because your friend Michael has
Yeah.
decided to give his next half hour to us.
Yes.
He wanted to watch the Super Bowl.
Yes, he
And
was.
we're willing to let go of the Super Bowl.
So we have 3 more minutes here, and then we'll be back at 7:30.
And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about my parents and my father's connection to this well-known person, Gandhi. And over here, I think that's Nehru.
Yeah.
And then something special that happened for me connected to my dad and mom's connection to Gandhi. And which led into I've had a lot of influences, but both my parents cared deeply about Martin Luther King. It's hard to get used to the TV screen, let's see. Who also, as you know, is a very powerful leader of nonviolence and civil disobedience, who learned a lot actually from Gandhi. And Gandhi actually learned a lot from Thoreau.
Yes.
And I'm sure there are women in there whose names aren't as well known, maybe didn't get to the same level of prominence. I know there was a famous transcendentalist woman in Concord who wrote a lot and knew Thoreau. Do you happen to know her name?
Louisa May Alcott was one of the women.
She was a younger generation. There were one a generation older, like Thoreau, but I can't remember her name right now. But if you're watching the show and you're interested, you could look it up. She was one of the transcendentalists who knew Emerson and Thoreau and others,
Yes.
Alcott's. So we're going to talk a little about that, and we're going to show some pictures.
We hope.
We hope.
Yes.
And we hope that my father's spirit is...
Yeah, I can feel it.
Michael can feel.
Yeah.
Do you feel it?
Yeah.
In what way?
I can see him smiling.
Oh.
Hi, Jack. Oh. At least imagining it.
Yeah.
But it feels touching to imagine.
So all of us have people who are, or almost all of us have people who are dear to us and sort of who help give us meaning in life. And so I'm going on and on about my father because he really did help me have a sense of belonging and value and meaning. And I was fascinated by his life as well. And I hope each of you who watches us has at least one, if not 5 or 10 or 15 or 17, just people who there's a level of depth of sharing that it really helps you have a sense of belonging in the world and being valued. So this picture is of my father here on the right. Whoops, right there. A little boy in a cute outfit.
Wow.
And his sister Lottie, they were in Germany. This is before World War II. Before my father was born on January 26, 1925. And I'd say he's maybe about 2 there.
Mm-hmm.
And Lottie is a few years older. And so the fear and the feelings about the Nazis and Hitler and World War II were probably not that apparent yet,
No.
even in Germany.
No.
So let's go on back to us.
Oh, here we are.
Yeah, we sort of disappeared and here we are. Magic. So there's a bunch more pictures, but I think it's a little weird for people watching the show to look at them too long. So I'll scroll down to the next one and then we can go to that. So this is my father as now a young boy, like maybe around 11 or 12, in a nice German outfit with the shorts on and the nice shoes and a jacket. His sister, his father, and his mother. I never met his father. I never met my grandfather because my grandfather died shortly after my father's family immigrated or essentially fled to America. But they were quite a lovely family, and there's a lot more I can say about them, but let's move on for now. They came by boat to America, and my grandfather, who I didn't meet, as I said, had contacts over here.
So your grandfather came here too?
Yeah, he
Oh,
died
my.
over here.
Oh my.
And this is my father grown up as a young man. He had studied engineering. He had actually gone back to Germany. I mean, not to Germany, sorry. He had actually gone back to fight the Germans, the German Nazi army, in Africa and a bit in Italy. So here he is, having already been a soldier in the American army, having been naturalized and gotten his American citizenship, having gone to, I think, City College in New York.
Yes, I think so.
And gotten his engineering degree.
Wow.
And he met my mother, who's on the right there, or if you're looking at the screen at home, maybe she's on your left, but you certainly will know who's who. He met her, they both happened to be on youth hostel trips in Amish country in Pennsylvania. And they fell, not immediately, but soon after, they re-met through circumstance, through fate, through destiny. Again, sort of amazing and magical that they actually re-met. And it's a long story, but at that point, they realized they really liked each other. And, even then, my father was sort of interested in another woman named Eva, which is also my mother's name. And my mother generally liked dark-haired guys who looked more Italian or like sang opera. And yet my parents, my dad who was more brown, blonde hair and green eyes, and my mom who was more dark-haired and dark-eyed, they started to really notice a great deal of affection between them and enjoyment. And they were on a canoe trip with other friends at that point. First they met on the Amish bike trip, and then through circumstances, coincidences and serendipities, and then plans, they met again on a big canoe trip.
Wow.
And at that point, in the up in the Adirondacks, they began to really fall in love. And it had 68 years together after.
Oh my Lord.
So I'll show you what that led to. It led to a family, as well as many, many trips. And I mentioned on the first part of the show that my dad and mom loved the Cape. And here we are. We even would go to the Cape in the winter because we liked the Cape so much. So that's me with long braids. Oh, let's go back to us. It's my first time doing this kind of
You're doing great.
thing on TV. So, and now the photos are off to the side again. There's my mother. There's my grandfather on my mother's side, who I did know quite well. There's my sister Ananda, all bundled up. You can barely tell it's her. And my other sister Claudia. Oh, what happens is I click on it trying to show, and then it disappears. The picture disappears. So here we are. And then my father on the left. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So let's take a break from the photos a few minutes. So yeah, I mean, what I'm trying to think about is how is what I shared and what my sisters and mother shared with my father helpful or inspiring or important to the rest of you, because it wasn't your father, and maybe you didn't even know him. You know, maybe this is audience members out there who've never met my father. Though I will say his name, because you never know, there may be more people out there watching this who happen to know him than I realize. So his full name in Germany was Hans Jacob Apfelbaum. And when he came to the States, he changed it sooner or later, I don't know how soon, to Jack Apfelbaum, sort of more Americanized, or sometimes Jack Hans Apfelbaum. And when he passed away, we had an incredibly hard time figuring out what was really on his Social Security. We didn't know it was Hans Jacob Apfelbaum or H. Jacob Apfelbaum or Jacob Hans Apfelbaum or Jack. We didn't know, and it took, we couldn't actually, we couldn't prove that he had died for a while because we didn't have his name right. And then finally we figured out what his actual name on his Social Security was. And don't ask me because I've already forgotten. But he mostly was known by Jack Apfelbaum. And I know you changed your name. Your family did too.
My family changed my name when I was born.
Oh, what was it before?
My fathers grew up as Charles Koran and lived as Charles Koran. But when I was born, my mother didn't like the name Koran. It sounded corny.
Was it K?
K-O-R-N.
Oh, okay.
She didn't like him either, actually.
Yeah.
And she got him to put an R-A between the R and the N.
Oh, your mother did that.
On the birth certificate.
Wow.
And they changed their name to Koran, too, then.
Oh.
But when my father, like your father, enlisted to fight in World War II, he went back to his draft board name, which was Korn.
Oh.
And they kept it. So I never knew until I went to the draft board at 18 that my legal name was Koran.
Oh, how
I thought it
interesting.
was Korn.
Oh, I didn't know that part of the story. And I think it's very fitting for you because even though you teach about Judaism and you certainly are from a Jewish bloodline and background, I know you've been very interested in the connection between religions and in between Abraham and, help me out, Isaac and
Jacob, your
Jacob.
father's name, yeah.
So to have a name, the Koran,
Yes.
though you don't quite pronounce it that way, but it's sort of fitting for you to have a name that almost makes it seem that you could be also from an Islamic background.
Yes, no, I
Yeah.
love being part of the Sufis.
Oh, Sufi too.
Yeah, I dance with them every. You
And
walk in
they're
between us and-
Islamic, but basically,
The
sort of.
Sufis are a mystical branch of Islam that embraces all religions, like Unitarians.
Like Baha'i does.
Yes,
too.
like Baha'i does.
And yet it's its own distinct thing.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, but sort of universal.
Yes,
It's beautiful.
God
yeah.
is love and everything is God.
So going back to my father, so one thing I want to share with you all is that one of my father's gifts was that he was very open also to all kinds of people, as is my mother. And that meant Muslim men in prison that my mother and him worked with. It meant little children.
More than worked with, they became very close friends with one of them.
Yes, and unfortunately he passed away this year.
Oh, but they visited him for years in prison.
Years.
What
My
was
mother
his name?
started it. Malik.
Malik, and
Malik.
then became friends with him when he was released.
Yeah, he went out to visit them by train.
Yes.
And he would go canoeing with my dad on the same lake
Wow.
and help my father in a little vegetable garden in the backyard and talk with my mom. My mother had started the whole thing by choosing to go work in the Concord prison as a volunteer and then began to write about some of the prisoners that she liked.
Mhm.
And I think she may have also done writing exercises with them in prison like you did for years with your wonderful piece that you created, Pros and Cons, a
Yeah.
very clever name with the pun of cons,
Yes, it was
pros
just
and cons.
a summary of what it was like to teach a final exam in maximum security prison.
Oh, wow. So,
But they were wonderful. They shared that. They would invite people from India. I think a girl from India to stay with them. People from New York City would come. Children from New York City would come out to Littleton and live for a
yeah,
week.
fresh air children.
Yes, your father and mother shared that.
They did.
They
and it,
didn't need to convince each other,
That's
as far as I
right.
know.
You're absolutely right. It really enriched our lives. They had a whole year long a student from Thailand who, even though my parents, I think they were already in their 80s, she called them Papa and Mama, even though they could have been her grandparents. And then they had, along with many other wonderful little Tonians,
Yeah.
they had fresh air kids almost right to the end when they just couldn't manage it, I think, the last year or
Wow.
two, because both of them are having a little more trouble being really active and getting around. But it was right up to the near end. And my mom still walks. I went on like a 5-mile walk with her
Wow.
this recently. And she's survived 3 cancers, lymphoma. So I guess we've got good genes.
You got good genes.
We do.
Yeah.
I do. But that quality of being open-minded and genuinely interested in other people and
A caring of other people.
really caring.
Really opening their house.
Yeah.
I think the only regret I have in my life is not going on the India trip that your parents led.
Wow, maybe I can lead a trip
I would
and
go
you
with
can
you.
come
I would
on
go,
that.
for
That
sure.
would be amazing.
I promise you I will
It'd
go.
be again like fulfilling some part of destiny.
I would love to do that if you do that.
I have a real interest right now in going back to India and studying trees and forests and democracy and values of democracy that actually in part emerge from the rootedness that Indian culture has in the forest, and the understanding of the different trees all being very important and equally valued as part of a healthy ecosystem full of biodiversity, as a metaphor or a parallel for the need for diversity in a well-functioning democracy, where the whole system is one and yet the parts are quite unique.
Yes.
And I there's actual writing and stories about it, and there's also religious texts in the Bhagavad Gita. Is the Bhagavad Gita religious? It's epic.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Mahabharata. There's things in there about stories set in the forest, and a lot of the sadhus who meditate in the forest, or Buddha, who was under a tree to find wisdom as part of his path of finding enlightenment.
He said he wouldn't leave until he was enlightened.
Right, and it's interesting. Where was he? Under a tree,
Yes,
by the roots of a tree, not in a city hall.
No.
Not by. He did go by rivers a lot, but not specifically by a river, but under a tree.
Under a tree.
And so much of the research about trees nowadays is showing that they have feelings, or a kind of consciousness, that they actually sort of can protect their own young and send nutrients and chemicals to their own young around them, and also to other species, but that they prioritize their own young, their own species. And there's been a lot of research coming out about trees being much more like us, being much more evolved than we tend to think in Western society. I think a lot of you may know there was a bestseller book called something like The Hidden Life of Trees that came out a few years ago. There was also an earlier one, The Hidden Life of Plants, right? The Secret Lives of Plants.
Yeah.
I think this is The Hidden Life of Trees. And then if you look at a tree, its formation is a lot like our own heart and lungs and veins, that actually quite similar, the looks. If you really, not the same size, but a similar formation, and they both help us breathe. We breathe in oxygen that the trees help put out, and they breathe in the carbon that we breathe out. They use that. So there is a reciprocity.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's interesting that.
And your dad would be proud. Look at your daughter. Look at her love of trees.
Oh, right, because his name is Apfelbaum. Last name means apple tree.
Yeah.
And I do
too?
love apples, and they do keep the doctor away.
And you do, and that's your name too.
Yeah. So when I was little, we went to India. So part of my love of India that I inherited from my parents is that when I was just about 6, my father and mother decided to accept a job that my father had pursued through American International Development and via Ohio University. So it was American International Development was the funding behind it, but it was somehow channeled administratively through Ohio University. And he was assigned to go to southern India to teach more modern engineering concepts and practices to other engineering teachers, or engineering practitioners. I'm not sure.
And he told me one of the reasons he left was he didn't want his engineering skills to contribute to the Vietnam War effort.
Oh my goodness, there's always more that I'm learning about him and my mother, and also sometimes I remember new things, like that I haven't thought about for ages, but I never knew that. I did know that my father made a point to try not to take engineering work that involved military contracts, but I hadn't known that, and it makes sense. That fits with the rest of the picture I had about him. We also left because where we were living in Springfield was getting somewhat violent and dangerous, and that's a whole other story. But I'm going to stick very quickly with when we went to India the first time, which was 1967.
We have 2 minutes.
My father and mother really introduced a love of elephants, wild elephants, to me. And I've carried that interest forward for many years and did a full-length one-woman show about them with live music. But when my father was passing last year, if we can cut to this picture. Wait, hold on a minute, sorry. One more sec. I'm going to show you a picture of when he was at home in hospice, and don't worry, it's not a really sad picture, though some of hospice was very hard. Okay. So there's this, oops, there, he's in a hospital bed in the corner of our living room where we could have a lot of visitors over, and he could kind of hold court as the beautiful, kind, kingly man that he was. And you can't necessarily really see, not sure how big the image is for you watching this show, but in my hand there's a soft blue doll, and it's actually a soft elephant. And oddly enough, even though my dad turned 93 just a few days before he sadly did pass away, though I'm hoping he's happy in some other realm now, odd to get a 93-year-old man a doll, an elephant puppet, for his birthday, but I didn't have a lot of time to shop because I was mostly spending all my time by his bedside, and I ran out and I saw this at a Papermate store, and I actually thought, I think Dad could use something cuddly and sweet by his head and his neck and his shoulder at night, and what better than a beautiful little soft elephant.
10 seconds. What a wonderful way to end.
And he loved it.
Yes.
He loved it.
And we love you, Jack.
Yes, we do, Dad. And thank you so much, Michael.
Wow, really right.